Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to the September 2024 lecture of the Arizona Archaeological and Historical Society. My name is Sebastian. I am the Vice President of Activities. Before I introduce our speaker for tonight, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional lands of the Tohono O'odham and the home of the Pasquayaqui. We honor their presence here in the past and today. Our speaker today is Suze Eckert. She's the head of collections at the Arizona State Museum. She earned her doctorate degree in 2003 from Arizona State University. Her research focuses on how late ancestral Pueblo cultures organize ceramic technology. She's especially interested in how this technology integrated with other aspects of society, including migration, political and social organizations, religious practice and ideology, and gender and ethnic relations. During the presentation, if you have any questions, you can write them in the chat feature in Zoom, and Suze will answer them after her presentation. So Dr. Eckert, please, if you can turn your camera on now, and you can go ahead with the presentation. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Sebastian, for the introduction. Let me get this up and running. All right. So, thank you, ArcandHis, for inviting me. It is actually a really fun opportunity to tell people about our current research, mine and my co-PI's current research out at Lion Mountain area. We have done various publications and a few SAA presentations, but I think this is the first hour-long presentation opportunity that we have had to present this. It is ongoing research. So our data set, our knowledge, our understanding of the region is constantly growing and changing. For example, in October, we are going out to test a Pueblo IV site, and you will notice that I'm not talking about the Pueblo IV very much today. That's because we don't know much about the Pueblo IV in the area. And so, yeah, this is a active project, but I definitely feel we have enough to share at this point that is exciting and interesting. Let's see. Okay, so I'm going to start with a bit of background because I'm pretty sure that this is going to be new for lots of folks. The Lion Mountain area is located 90 miles southeast of Zuni Pueblo and 50 miles or so south of Acoma. The study area is in or near the traditional cultural areas of at least 6 present-day tribes: the Zuni and the Acoma, the Piro, who are not federally recognized but are still present in New Mexico and Texas, the Alamo Navajo, the Mescalero Apache, and the San Carlos Apache. Currently, we are working with the Zuni in the region, but we hope to bring in more tribes as we move into the next phase of our project. Archaeologically, as this map shows, the region is at a boundary of 3 cultural areas: the Mogollon area, the Cibola region, and the Rio Grande region. And so it has a complex history and cultural dynamic that was really exciting for Deb Huntley and I when we first started thinking about this area. This site covers all the things that we're sort of interested in. This is another view of the region. The triangles are different obsidian sources used by folks in our study area over time, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But the area is located 7,000 to 8,000 feet on the western edge of the Gallinas Mountains, if you're familiar with the area, and it borders the eastern edge of the plain of San Agustin. And for those of you who are familiar with the plains of San Agustin, you may know that the Very Large Array is out there. And from all the high points in our survey area, we can see the Very Large Array, and it never fails to excite. And we probably have more pictures of the Very Large Array than anything else in the study area. It's really cool. And sometimes we're up on the high points and you see the arrays slowly moving, and yeah, it's neat. So if you're familiar with that area, we're just to the east of it. A large portion of the study area is on the Magdalena Ranger District of the Cibola National Forest. However, some of it is also on private land, although we have not been on the private land, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. Visually, the Lion Mountain dominates the landscape, and this is a picture of the Lion Mountain. This is what we see from our study area. However, our survey area, the area that I'm talking about today, that I keep calling the Lion Mountain area or the Lion Mountain community, is not on Lion Mountain. We can see it. We have actually never been on it because it is on private land. There are sites that are on it, but we've never been there. We can just see it. So keep that in mind, even though it's named Lion Mountain, and I'll explain why it's named that in a little bit. There are no permanent waterways in the area. However, there are a few springs that dot the landscape. And the environment is pretty much ponderosa pine forest at higher elevations, going into pinyon juniper woodland dominating the lower elevations. So an environment that probably everyone who has spent time in the Southwest is familiar with. Geologically, not a lot of clay in the area. Deb and I are ceramicists. We worry about this a lot. We look for clay a lot. There's clay somewhere because there's locally made pottery. We just haven't really found a lot of good clay sources. Lots of rhyolite. The residents of the area were using rhyolite for grinding stones. Sometimes they were flint knapping it. They used it to make the masonry of their houses, and they were tempering their pottery with it. There are also some other igneous materials in the area, and there's also a local obsidian source. So that kind of covers the environmental overview. Around 2013 or so, when Deb and I were out excavating at another site on the Cibola National Forest that's east of this study area, Cliff Nickel, who some of you may have known, he was the Magdalena District archaeologist at the time. He has since passed away, but he introduced Deb and I to the Lion Mountain community. Technically, Deb and I had been out in this area in the late 90s with Joe Tainter and Linda Cordell and Keith Kindig and a few others, and we walked over some of these phenomenal sites. But we were young, foolish graduate students who didn't really appreciate what we were seeing at the time. And so when we went out again with Cliff, it was very, very exciting and really neat. And we realized we'd been out there before, but now we just had this whole new understanding and appreciation for the area. As I said, we were excavating at another site on the forest, but when we saw this area, we knew it's where we wanted to work next. The area reminded us of places that we had both either worked in or visited in the Zuni region. There's similar architecture, similar settlement patterns, and most excitingly for us, similar ceramics. So it was really just an obvious choice for us to move out there. And that choice was a good one. Over the first 2 brief survey seasons in the Lion Mountain area, we documented nearly 60 archaeological sites in about 2 square miles. And almost all of these sites date to the Pueblo III period and also the Pueblo II period, but mostly the Pueblo III. So it had a high, or it has a high site density. I took one look at the area and decided this is where I want to finish my career. I want to work in this area for the rest of my time as an active archaeologist. There are lots of questions that Deb and I have that are near and dear to our heart. This is sort of a list of them that we can ask out in this area that we are in the process of trying to address. There are other questions that are not so near and dear to us, maybe, like early agriculture, agricultural transition, agricultural practices through time, lithics. But there are other people who like those questions, and we have been fortunate to get more PIs with us and have lots of volunteers. Jeff Ferguson and Johnny Schaefer have joined us on the team, and they have been fantastic in terms of especially lithics, but also thinking about some of these issues that Deb and I don't worry about as much. And then we have had other people join us that are just volunteers, students, interns Many of you at Arc and Hist may know Carl and Fran. This is a picture of Carl. He is our designated tree tagger. He is making a tag. We find a site, we have to take a piece of metal, put the number on the metal and nail it to a tree. And he is the guy who does it for us. He's also really, really good at relocating tags when we go to sites or revisit sites. Tags are not always easy to find, and he has lots of other skills as well. He's absolutely wonderful in the field. Fran is also wonderful in the field. However, I was looking for pictures of Fran. We take lots of crew photos, and I cannot find a picture of Fran that it's obviously Fran. And at some point, I began to suspect that she is intentionally staying out of photos. And so this coming October, when we are in the field, I'm going to do everything I can to get various photos of her, because it is noticeable, since I have pictures of everybody else, that Fran is not in any of our photos in an obvious way. And I'd never noticed that before until today. So, okay, the research. I am going to show a lot of maps in this presentation. I will try and talk you through all of them. That's kind of the point of the presentation. But if they get confusing, I am going to be a little bit redundant and provide some summary data and summary tables for each of the time periods. And so hopefully it's not too confusing. I'd like to start with this larger map. I will show this map a couple of more times. It reflects both of our work and the work done by Marshall and Marshall in 2008. So in looking at this map, a couple of things. One, the dark area is all private land. And you can see down, I don't know if you can see my pointer, but you can see that this is the Lion Mountain. We have not been on any of this private land. So all of these sites that are on private land were recorded by Marshall and Marshall. What I'm going to talk about mostly today is the area in the red oval, and this map down here is that area. I'm going to be showing you various maps, this map or this view with various sites through time on it, and this reflects this red oval. Marshall and Marshall, when working on the private land, are actually the ones who named this area the Lion Mountain area, or the Lion Mountain Community. And so we have continued with that name because we believe that what we are finding is part of this bigger phenomenon that Marshall and Marshall discovered. We will, as we talk about, or as I talk about the data, I will be addressing Marshall and Marshall's data, which we did incorporate into our study, even though we haven't had a chance to go out to those sites. But the report is good, and they use similar techniques in terms of ceramic analysis and mapping and that sort of thing, that it was really easy to incorporate that into our work. Winkler and Davis also worked out here in 1961. We have not been able to incorporate their data. They did not do ceramics the same way we do. And we suspect that at least one group of sites they put onto the wrong mesa, although we still are not totally clear on that. 1961, they're working off topo maps. They don't have GPS. That's not necessarily surprising, but ultimately we really haven't been able to incorporate their work with our work. But one of the main things that we're trying to understand here and incorporating or looking into this previous research in terms of understanding what we're looking at is we're trying to understand how the residential room blocks are situated on the landscape over time, especially in relationship to public architecture, because there's some really exciting public architecture in this oval area. And Marshall and Marshall also found some public architecture. So that's really what I'm talking about today. Steve Lekson also worked in this area, more to the east, but he also summarized the area as part of his publication in the 1996 chapter on the P3 volume. And these two images, I think, sort of really summarize what Steve Lekson was saying. He described this area as mixed but interesting, with having a mixed but interesting cultural historical dynamic. And as I showed this map before, the study area really is at this point of 3 different regions. But those 3 different regions have different histories, different periods, and different phases that archaeologists have defined because they're somewhat different in terms of their pottery. They're somewhat different in terms of their settlement patterns. You can see here the yellow bar is the Lion Mountain Community that I'm talking about today. And you can see these different phases and periods that different people may be familiar with different ones. We use the Pueblo one, well, the Pecos classification, the Cibola region one, the Pueblo 1 through Pueblo 4, this one here, if you can see my pointer. And that's because we believe that the settlement patterns that we're seeing are related to the settlement patterns that happened in the Zuni district of the Cibola region. And again, I will talk about that as we move through here. Okay, so basically the talk today is looking at our core data as what I believe Andrew Duff called the dots through time talk. Basically, we're going to look at how settlement patterns change through time. So dots on a map and how those things changes happening, where the community focus was, changes in settlement patterns, changes in ritual architecture. Going to provide input from Marshall's and Lekson's work when appropriate. Most of these data have been published, or a lot of these data have been published in various places. So today I'm going to go into a little bit more detail than publications have allowed and address some of the questions that I have gotten, I think at least Deb has gotten, from folks who have either read the papers or visited the sites or seen our presentations. So those questions are specifically in terms of the Chacoan outlier that I'm going to talk about and why we think it's a Chacoan outlier. And then also people seem to have some questions about the possible Mesa Verde immigration site. So keep those things in mind as we're moving through here. And if you have more questions, please ask them at the end. I am expecting questions about Chaco. I'm expecting questions about the Pueblo III period. I'm expecting possible questions about the immigration site. So just sort of organize, realize that's sort of the organization and the direction I'm going in. Okay, data collection, systematic pedestrian survey, up and down, up and down, up and down, drawing detailed maps of the sites as we find them. We've had in-field artifact analysis, especially pottery and lithics, in-field XRF of the obsidian that has been led by Jeff Ferguson, but Johnny Schaefer did his master's thesis out here on that topic. We've done some drone photography, and then Jeff recently has been bringing LiDAR out and experimenting with LiDAR at some of the sites. We have gained an appreciation for these various technologies. Some of them have been working better than others, but it has been a nice, it's been a nice crew of people, a good crew of people to try out some new things and experiment with some things along with traditional techniques. We do not collect the pottery. So the thing that I probably do most importantly out here is the in-field ceramic analysis. You can see a picture of me here doing that. And this is a summary of the decorated pottery frequencies at all of the sites we've found. And you can see here that the majority of the decorated pottery is Cibola whiteware, thus one of the reasons we think it's a lot like the Cibola region. And then also White Mountain redwares, again, similar to the Cibola region. I'll talk a little bit about these other wares towards the end of the talk. I've taken these ceramic types and created an initial ceramic date range for each of the sites that have pottery. These are survey sites. This is basically creating a seriation of surface collections, right? What you're looking at here is mean ceramic dates plus standard deviation of each of the sites that we found that have enough pottery, right? This is a way for us to start getting at talking about changes through time. There are plenty of problems with it. These are surface collections. So, deeper components we may not be getting at. There's also sample size problems. I have an arbitrary cutoff of at least 20 decorated types. Some of these sites have hundreds of sherds. Some we're lucky if we find 10. So there's those problems as well. So this is an initial time period. Sites without pottery are not on the graph for obvious reasons. And then some sites that don't have enough pottery are not on the graph. The sites without pottery are usually pre-ag sites, and so those have been dated with projectile points when available, but again, we don't always have those kinds of artifacts. So this is just the challenge of working with survey data. Okay, that's the quick introduction. I'm now going to start jumping into some data. Really quickly, pre-agricultural sites in the area. And by that, I mean our survey area and a Marshall survey area. Paleo-Indian, Archaic, maybe Basketmaker 2 sites. Previous research in the Paleo-Indian and Archaic for the greater region argues that these kinds of pre-agricultural sites were actually immediate west of the study area. So again, if you can see my arrow here, on the plains of San Augustine. Holiday has worked out here a lot and talked about that. So this is really where the primary pre-agricultural sites are, and there's a bunch out there. There is some evidence in our area for early use. Some of this evidence comes from, say, isolated finds. So this Midland Paleo-Indian point, it was found, I think, about 20 meters, I think it was 20 meters or so, from a Pueblo III room block. So what is that, right? The room block dates to the 1200s, agricultural period. So is this an isolated find? Maybe, showing that people wandered over, Paleo-Indian people were wandering over the landscape. Could be that there's an earlier buried component in the area that we're just not seeing because it's deep under sediments. And that could be true for a lot of these earlier sites. Or maybe it was curated by later agriculturalists. We've seen evidence of that at various sites throughout the Southwest. So I don't know, but this is where a lot of our evidence comes from. But we do have 4 or 5 sites that are clearly identified based on points to be part of the pre-agricultural. Most of them date to Middle Archaic to Basketmaker 2E based upon the diagnostic lithic artifacts. We, along with Marshall and Marshall, interpret these sites as hunting stations or activity areas that are kind of neat because they support the notion that there is this long history of people in the area, but it doesn't appear to be necessarily a really intensive use of the area. There are a few other sites, including this one pictured here, that if you've spent a lot of time on archaeological sites, which I know many of you have, they just feel like there's an archaic site right here, even if it's not a lot of artifacts. We have these large areas that have these huge dispersed chipstone scatters. They're sometimes on high points. Sometimes there's a little bit of groundstone. There's no evidence of structures. It's really low density artifacts just on a huge area. And it just feels like there's an archaic site there. There probably is, but they're very hard and elusive to define. Also keep in mind that a lot of the sites I'm going to show you later, the Pueblo sites, they could be multi-component sites. There may be early components that are underneath the surface, that are underneath the Pueblo sites, and we're not seeing those either. There's also, when we start getting into the Basketmaker periods, we also know that there's definitely pit houses in the greater region that are adjacent to our survey and Marshall's survey area. There's just none that or very few that we have identified in our area. So that's the pre-agricultural phase. That's all I'm going to say about it. Next, we get into the Basketmaker 3 and Pueblo 1. And this is the beginning of what I really, really want to talk about. So for the rest of the time, we are looking at locations of public architecture, habitation sites, and other sites. So by public architecture, I mean structures that we have interpreted as being socially integrative, used by more than a household of people, probably for specific ceremonies or other socio-ritual gatherings. I'm going to talk about some great houses. We do not know if the great houses were residential in nature or not. We just don't know. We haven't done excavation. We've mapped them, so we don't know. Habitation sites, residential structures. There's some early pit houses, but mostly we're talking about room blocks that we think one or more families lived in. And then other. Most of our other sites are garden plots, but there's also some hunting blinds and some areas that are undefined activity areas. And so that's what we're going to be looking at for the rest of these maps. So this is Pueblo 1 Basketmaker, late Basketmaker. Sites of these components are very few in the survey area, and that includes Marshall's area up here to the north and to the west. We know there are Pueblo 1 pit house sites sort of in the adjacent area that we have not systematically surveyed yet. So we know there are other earlier sites out there, but none in our immediate area, or not many in our immediate area. 2 of the 3 habitation sites here are likely pit house sites. The other habitation site is a small Pueblo masonry room block. The blue triangles in this time period are possibly hunting blinds or activity areas. What's of special interest is the first evidence of the construction of public architecture. And there are 2 here, the red and the red. So this one was constructed, we think, possibly late in this time period, but it appears to have been used throughout the next time period. So I'm going to talk about it as part of the next time period, but it is the Chaco Great House. This site appears to be primarily dating to this time period, this one kind of out here in the flats. And this is the Great Kiva site. Most of the ceramics date it to this time period, although it may have continued a little bit into the early Pueblo II period. So these 2 sites may have overlapped, but this is the earlier one. And let's see. This is me standing in the Great Kiva. There's pin flags marking its boundaries. We suspect, if you look at this map, you can see that this is the extent of the ceramics, is the boundary of the site. We suspect that the kiva may have pit houses surrounding it, but despite walking over the site multiple seasons, multiple weather conditions, we just have not been able to confidently identify any. But this may be a lone great kiva, or it may be a great kiva with surrounding pit houses. But we suspect that this great kiva served to ritually integrate the local pit house residents of the greater area. It is the first earliest community architecture that we have identified in the greater area, although, like I said, we haven't surveyed all of the area, so there may be others out there. But currently we are arguing that the location of this great kiva is the foundation of what we're going to be calling the Lion Mountain Community's ritual core. And that will make more sense as we move on time period. It is my hope that at some point we can get some remote sensing done out at this site so we can see if there are any pit houses or anything like that. If there are any students out there that are really excited with the idea of doing pit house sites, please contact us. We have master's theses and dissertations abundant, because none of us are really focusing on this time period. But for now, what's important is that this really appears to be the earliest community structure. And this is a summary of that as a table rather than just as a map for people who find tables a little bit easier. Pit house sites in the greater area. The Great Kiva site served to integrate these surrounding pit houses. And we think that this is laying the foundation for the Lion Mountain community's ritual core. And we're just going to keep going through the time periods rather than me taking questions for each time period, and hopefully just hold on to your questions till the end. So next is the Pueblo II period. Again, remember in looking at these maps that some of these sites have multiple components. So they may start in one period and end in the next. That is reflected in these maps. So during the Pueblo II period, there's a dramatic increase in habitations within the survey area, right? So what we're looking at here. This does not mean that there's necessarily a population increase within the region. We just haven't done the survey, right? And so it's possible, like I said, that there's pit houses out here that people living in those pit houses kind of move into this area. We don't know for sure. It does seem like there's like this population increase, but this is only 2 square miles. All told, with our data and Marshall's data, there are 23 habitation sites throughout this area and the Marshall area. 15 of these sites are built later in the period and seem to date mostly into the next period. There are 8 habitation sites that are built kind of on the earlier end of the period, 6 with multiple room blocks. But what is most interesting about this time period are the 4 public architectural sites. So one, there's the Great Kiva site. This one, as I just said, primarily dates to the previous period. And so it sort of ends early in this period and stops being used. Then there's the Bobcat site, which is a Chaco Great House. And it was initially constructed towards the end of the last period, possibly, but dates primarily to this period. And this is the Chaco period, and this is the Chaco Great House. So I'm going to talk about it a little bit more. Then there's 2 other sites right here on this ridge. These are also Great House sites, but they were constructed towards the end of the period and mostly date during Pueblo III. So I'm going to talk about these during the Pueblo III period, right? So it's a little bit complex, but really for most of this time period, the Pueblo II period, there is one public architectural site, and it's this one right here. So let's go through the arguments about the Chaco Great House, because that is where I get a lot of questions. Okay, for those not familiar with the Chaco phenomena, we get one slide. Chaco is huge. Chaco has been many, many people's careers, many, many books, many, many classes, but here we get one slide. Beginning at about AD 850, there are large, multi-storied pueblos, which get called great houses, with numerous ceremonial features, many of which are great kivas, that were constructed in Chaco Canyon. This is about 125 miles northwest of the study area. This canyon becomes the center of what is known as the Chaco phenomena. I am not a Chaco specialist. I study the later time periods. So I'm trying to be as general here as possible. But it is a widespread socio-ritual development, culture complex. It integrated this sort of regional system of trade and interaction, which is characterized by the presence of these red dots, these Chacoan outliers that are basically great houses and sometimes great kivas that are outside the canyon. And there's roads throughout much of this sphere of influence, this phenomenon, this area, this system. The exact political and social nature of the Chaco phenomena, I would say, continues to be debated. People talk about this all the time. But what I think isn't debated, especially for the purposes of us, is that its sort of rise and then decline had a major impact on developments in this sort of area of influence during the Pueblo II. And our argument is that that includes the Lion Mountain study area. So that's Chaco. We think we have a Chaco Great House. Bobcat Pueblo. If any of you are familiar with Keith Kintig, he was mine and Deb's advisor, and he always said that you do a Chaco outlier when you see it. And as you walk over it, like the hairs on the back of your neck would stand up. Deb and I are not that confident as he is. So it's probably taken us a couple of seasons to really come to believe that this site is definitely a Chacoan outlier. I think we thought about it from the beginning. But the numerous times we walked over it, remapped it, and some of the data as we've collected it. The pottery is comfortably Pueblo II for the most part. It has Cibola gray wares and Mogollon brown wares for those of you who care about the utility wares, but it's mostly locally made utility wares on top of decorated wares that seem to be coming from mostly the West, although there are some locally made utility wares, although all the locally made wares are white wares. There's also this small piece of worked turquoise that was found on the surface of the site, and Art Vokes has identified it for us as a possible tessera. I think that's what it's called. The inlay for a mosaic. He said that because it has this beveled edge. I think you can see it in the photo. The picture that we cite, it's beveled around the edges. The other side is totally flat, but this side is beveled. So he suggested that that's because it's part of an inlay. Kristen Safi and Andrew Duff have outlined 13 characteristics for identifying a Chacoan Great House as part of their work out at Lago Gap, which is way west of the study area on the other side of the San Augustine Plains. They are fortunate to have excavation data, so some of these characteristics we cannot know at this point. We just can't decide because we don't have the information, but I think that a lot of them help a lot. So these are the first 9. As you can see, the top 5, we don't know because we haven't excavated. 6 and 7, the masonry enclosed plaza and the berm. So this is the site. This is a really high point. The picture you saw of me in the last one that I'll show again in a second is me standing up on top of this site. Then there's a lower site down here. And then it's not quite a cliff, but this is a pretty steep decline from this high point. And so out here, there is a masonry wall. It's not very tall. Here, there may be masonry or this may be a berm. So either way, this sort of encloses a plaza-like area. It feels more like a berm to me, especially because it's got some of these openings. But either way, it's one or the other. Maybe a little bit of both, but I feel like we do have this. I'm just tending towards calling it a berm instead of a masonry enclosed plaza. Linear axis. All of these have this linear shape to them, or both room blocks do. This one does have the little room block out on the side, so that's why there's the question mark. Does that count? I think so. I think these are linear axis. Probable Great Kiva. Yep, this is a good depression. This had a roof on it. It's a kiva. It's a deep depression. And so, yeah, there's a kiva here, probably a great kiva, depending on how you want to define the size of a great kiva. And Safi and Duff didn't talk about this, but we also have roads, or at least a road. The LiDAR, so this is the site, the direction of the site, this is the ridge. The LiDAR found this that's sort of hard to see. on the surface, but it's right here, right? So this is along the ridge, this is pointing north, and it's coming into this area right here. And we're going to explore that more, but it does appear to be at least one sort of symbolic road segment as part of this site. 10 and 12 or 10 and 11, possibly multi-story and possibly having over tall rooms. Again, we haven't excavated, so we don't know which one of these or both that we may have. This is the lower room block, and there's a bump and a rubble mound here. It flattens out right in here, and this is a rodent hole, and this is our meter stick. And this is a picture of that meter stick. And this is going down to a rock right here, and then it continues to go deeper. So we have a meter down here on top of whatever's, we have at least a meter on top of whatever height we have here. So this could be 2 stories tall. These could be really tall rooms. We don't know, but this does suggest that this is a deep, tall site. And then an elevated location. This is me standing on the higher point. It is on a natural rise. It may be 1 or 2 stories. We don't know. This is me, or I'm sorry, this is up here looking in this direction. So we can see in the distance. And then this is a panoramic taken from the high point. So it is elevated in the sense that it is tall, but it is also elevated in that it has a wonderful view of the Lion Mountain and the surrounding region. And so we would argue that absolutely it's an elevated location. And then, oh, here we go. Number 13 is that it has a related community. And we've already talked about this. Here is the Bobcat Pueblo. Here are all of the sites that are habitation sites that were built during the Pueblo II. Some of these may have been built prior to the Bobcat Pueblo, but like I said, a lot of them seem to be built a little bit later. So it's possible that this Chacoan outlier is attracting a community, but ultimately, yes, there is a related community. This is what these sites look like. A little bit flatter. This is a 2-room one. Some of them have multiple rooms, up to 12 rooms. Some of them have more. Some of them have 20 rooms. But these are just these basic small little residential sites. This is what ceramics look like from some of these habitation sites. And so this is a summary of all of that information in table form, which is hopefully helpful for some. But the points are, there is a Chaco Great House that dates primarily to this period. So one large piece of public architecture. The other ones date more to other time periods. There are dispersed room block community that develops around the Chaco Great House, so that by the end of the period, there are 23 habitation sites that have a Pueblo II component. And then late in the period, there are 2 additional Great House sites that are built that date primarily to the following period. And so that's what we'll talk about next. Okay, the Pueblo III period. And this is a lot of sites. This is where my heart lies. This is a time period that I absolutely love. This is what I did my master's thesis on, and I wish I'd done my dissertation on. So, yeah, I know Chaco's neat, but this is neat too. So these are the sites with the Pueblo III components. And again, remember, there are sites that have multiple components, and this is based upon survey data and surface data. But this is probably the main period of occupation for this survey area and the immediate area with Marshall and Marshall's study as well, based upon the number of room blocks and the other kinds of sites. Again, during this period, just as with the Pueblo II period, there appears to be this dramatic increase inhabitation sites. I mean, you can see there's a bunch of green squares on the landscape. But again, this is within our survey area. Many of these sites are larger than the previous Pueblo II period. So it's not just an increase in site number, but it appears to be an increase in room count, assuming that all of these are basically contemporaneous. But that doesn't mean that there's necessarily a population increase in the region. We just haven't done the survey work to know that for sure. But in summary, all told, including Marshall and Marshall's area, there are 35 small habitation sites, 13 large habitation sites, and what I mean by that are sites that have multiple room blocks and 20 plus rooms. The Chaco Great House on this map is still there, right? This is Bobcat Pueblo, because it does have a handful of Pueblo III sherds. Whether that means it was still in use during this time period or people dropped them because there's a bunch of Pueblo III people living in the area, we don't know. But what is exciting is that there are 4 post-Chacoan Great House sites in our region, or I'm sorry, on this ridge in our immediate survey area. And there are also 2 post-Chacoan Great House sites and 1 Great Kiva site up to the north in the Marshall region. And I'll show a map of that as we talk about the Pueblo III. So what do I mean by a post-Chaco Great House? I think a lot of people are familiar with Chaco. They're familiar with Chaco and Great Houses. And depending on who's on here and is familiar with Keith Kintig's work, some of you know what a post-Chaco and Great House is. But I'm going to dig into that a little bit deeper. Keith Kintig defined for the Zuni district of the Cibola region. And so here's the study area, here's the Zuni district, and here's his map from the Pueblo III volume edited by Adler. Defined these post-Chacoan Great House sites. And what he meant by a post-Chacoan Great House was having a combination of ritual features. There's the kind of a great house that has some of the characteristics that were also true of a Chaco great house, but in the Pueblo III period instead, possibly berms, and then a great kiva that was often unroofed, that they're just so big that they can't be roofed. And that's what we're looking at here, right? This is Los Gigantes. It has a large kiva, it has a great house, has some other room blocks. It is a core area. And so there are other room blocks in the area, and that's part of the definition, as with the Chaco Great House, that there's a community in the area. So there are a whole bunch of residential sites. This is the fourth site. It actually dates to the same time period. It's located right here, but it too has a community of room blocks in the area, but this is a very different kind of post-Chacoan community. It is a walled off Pueblo that has this large plaza. It appears to have square kivas in it, but it is in the same area, dates to the same time period. And then this is the Hinkson site down here. This is where I did my master's thesis. Great house, unroofed great kiva. This is very large. It was never had a roof. There is a plaza area, there's a berm, and then there are these sort of symbolic roads. So these are all different versions of post-Chacoan communities that are all within the same area during the same time period. And Keith's idea is that these are P3 communities that are hearkening back to Chaco, right? They're emulating Chaco in some ways, but on a very local level. So it's not tied into this big regional system. It is a local phenomena. And so locally, different communities are deciding which aspects of Chaco they want to express, right? And so you get this mix and match of different kinds of ritual features. Unroofed great kiva is new. Great kivas aren't, but this unroofed one is. Berms there may be berms or roads in some places. Other places have great houses. It's this mix and match of choosing aspects of Chaco. And I think this is what we're seeing in the Lion Mountain community. I think it's an aggregated post-Chacoan community like Hinkson and Los Gigantes that has its own local flavor. I think it is an Eastern rendition of this phenomena that Keith defined, or eastern edge of the Cibola area that he defined. So let's talk about that. Here's one of those great houses that is on the ridge. It's called the Nickel Site, named after Cliff. The site has two very large room blocks, possibly 2 stories. They are massive, with this circular wall around it, and it is a double perimeter wall. This is an aerial, a drone photo of that wall. This is a temperature, apparent temperature taken right at sunset, where the rocks are still warm, and so they show up. And you can see the double wall really well here. And then this is Deb and I standing on that double wall. And I think we're standing right in this area, right on the edge, where we can definitely see wall alignment, and it moves back into this direction. Yeah, this is a rather unusual, unique site. There are no other sites like this in the area. The other sites are different. For example, this one. This one also is on the ridge. We call it an unroofed Great Kiva site whenever I'm out there. This is us standing on the edge of this round area. You can kind of see the rocks. When mapped, it doesn't feel as round as it looks when we're standing on it. So is it a Great Kiva, or is it some kind of open ceremonial space? Same thing with this one. We don't know. Massive architecture here, right? This is the room block, and I hope you can see how tall it is, and how just the amount of rocks and the size of rocks and the size of the mound. Again, it may be 2 stories, and it's very different than the residential room blocks. This is a big site with tall architecture, unusual features that may be kivas or maybe plaza spaces. Also during this time period, as I mentioned, in the Marshall and Marshall area, there are 2 great house sites and a great kiva site up here. This star is the Camelot on the San Augustine. We have not been to this site. We have not been to any of these sites, but the map is pretty good. Great house right in here. Or maybe 2 great houses right in here. It's got in-house kiva maybe. There's a great kiva out here. These are identified as middens, but this has a feeling of a berm to me. But this appears to be another one of these post-Chacoan great house sites based upon the pottery that is found on the site that Marshall and Marshall recorded. But again, we have not seen the site. This is speculation based upon the maps in his reports. So these are the great house sites, but they are surrounded by a P3 community. So these are 5 different habitation sites. These is solid St. John's. You can see these are not massive like the room blocks. Some of them are single room blocks. Some of them have double room blocks. They range from 6 rooms to 20+ rooms. And there's 48 of these habitation sites that we think date to this time period. And then also as part of this time period, garden plots, water control, and grid gardens. And the Hinkson site also had grid gardens in its area, or in its region over in the Zuni area. And these are all located on slopes of the various mesas. This is another one of these great house sites. These are 2 that I just know really good photos of this site because there's a lot of trees, but 2 massive room blocks and then a wall that seems to connect them that is sort of round. So ultimately, this is what the Pueblo III looks like, right? Multiple great houses with various different kinds of features. A couple of obvious questions that still stand out to us. Why so many great houses within a 100-year period, right? This is 1175 to 1275. Did all of these great houses date to the same moment in time? Are they sequential? Was one built and it continued, but then another built and so on? Did the residents of the area view these as separate features, separate ritual features, or were like everything on that ridge some kind of continuous large ritual area? Did these multiple great house sites integrate the whole community, or did they factionalize the community, right? We've got the ridge with 4, but then up in the Marshall area, there's 3 others. Was this some kind of factionalization? At this point, I am confident, I'd like to think my co-PIs are confident that these structures are all variations on a theme that harkens back to Chaco. But we don't really know why the variation occurs or what it means at this point. And some of that would be answered with more dating and better, tighter dating, although a 100-year time period is pretty tight dates. But right now, we don't know much more other than to be able to identify the variation. So the Lion Mountain community, centered on this kind of ritual core system, or this ritual core area, seems to come to an end in the early Pueblo IV period. The ritual complex is no longer in use. The residential sites appear to be abandoned. This also appears to be true for the Marshall survey area. There are a handful of sites that are P3 sites probably, but they do have a handful of these early Pueblo IV wares. And by that, I mean their glazes. That starts at around 1275. These are glazes. This is a glaze. This is a glaze. This is Quaquina. This is Hesh. This is a glaze. It's not a great glaze, but it should be a glaze. And if there's one thing Deb and I can identify, it's a glaze. So we're the most confident thing we are is this. And so this area, this immediate area, seems to just stop being used in terms of their structures. There are no large Pueblo IV sites in the survey area, but there are a couple that are a few miles from the site. I think the closest one that we know of currently is about 6 miles away, and that's the one that we are hoping to excavate, or at least start excavating in October. So we don't know a lot about the Pueblo IV period, except to say that in our immediate survey area, there just isn't any place that continues after the Lion Mountain community. Couple of other brief things, and then I will take some questions. The elephant in the room is Gallina Springs Pueblo, this star over here. So here's our Lion Mountain community, here's Marshall stuff. Over here is Gallina Springs Pueblo, and you can see it dates to the same time period as the post-Chacoan Great House part of the Lion Mountain community. This site has different architecture. Oh, no, that's right. This site has different architecture. It has different pottery. It's 150 to 300 rooms. This part across the arroyo here is probably 2 stories. So whoever took the picture, actually, I'm not sure which one of us took it, but there's room block over here. There's room block over here, standing, looking over at this area. This area does not seem to have been inhabited as long. There's speculation about this area, but this whole area is. Very different architectural layout, architectural style and pottery, as this shows. Not a lot of tabular architecture in the Lion Mountain area. There's some, but not a lot. This is different. The pottery stands out. It's Magdalena black on white. It is carbon painted and it's just very different. Some White Mountain redware as well, but the pottery at this site is very different. And so Lekson worked out here and has discussed this as possibly being representative immigrants from the Mesa Verde area. That is similar, this site, Pinnacle Ruin here, that the Lomboks have been working on. There's similarities between these two sites. They're both 150 to 300 rooms. They have carbon painted pottery. As a matter of fact, they have the same type of pottery. Like in our region, there is another site with Pinnacle Ruin, that's the Victorio site, that is very different in terms of its pottery and its layout, and it appears to be more of a local community, kind of like our Lion Mountain community is. The difference is Victorio is one site, whereas the Lion Mountain community seems to be more this aggregated post-Chacoan kind of site that Keith Kintig talked about. But ultimately, I believe Lekson when he says that this is probably an immigrant site from the Mesa Verde area that is contemporaneous or contemporary with the post-Chacoan period of the Lion Mountain community, right? The multiple Great House sites. If that's true, the new residents living in this area that came from Mesa Verde would have important implications or effects on the social dynamics of the Lion Mountain area. And that's whether or not they were warmly greeted into the region or not, or if there was debate as to whether or not they should be allowed to settle, or whatever that social dynamic was that brought them to the area. It would have an effect on the local community. And so that's a topic that we're hoping to explore more of, but we haven't really delved into more. Another thing is the in-field obsidian analysis, which is interesting. These are some of the main sites. This is the Bobcat Pueblo, Chacoan outlier, the Pueblo II site, mostly Mount Taylor obsidian. And that is similar to work done by Andrew Duff and others that found that other kinds of Chacoan great houses also seem to have mostly material from Mount Taylor. So that sort of matches. Whereas these are both Pueblo III period sites that are the Lion Mountain community, the post-Chacoan period. And they mostly have mostly have obsidian from McDaniel Tank, which is the local obsidian source. And this sort of reiterates what Keith Kintig is saying with the post-Chacoan community, that they really are kind of this local phenomenon. They're not tied into that much of a broader regional, that it's really looking inward as opposed to being tied into a greater network. And this sort of reflects that. The contemporaneous Gallina Springs site, which we think may be an immigrant site from folks from Mesa Verde, has mostly Mount Taylor. So it looks very different from its contemporary sites in the region. And this is just another way that that site looks different than the Lion Mountain community. And it may be because, being immigrants from the Mesa Verde area, they may be tied into different kinds of networks than other folks in that region. But there's other sites that have been looked at with the infield obsidian analysis, but this is just these larger, greater sites. And then last but not least, there are other pottery types out here. As I had said before, by far the most common decorated pottery type is Cibola whitewares, followed by St. John's, which is a White Mountain redware. Local decorated pottery appears to primarily be different versions of Cibola whiteware. Not uncommon, and I didn't put a picture up, but not uncommon is Socorro and Chupadero black on whites, and that suggests connections to the east and the Rio Abajo area. But there are pottery types like Plius and Size Red. These are the first 4 pictures I found, but I believe there are more of these that suggest connections to the south and to the Casas Grandes area. And then this is a Tularosa white on red. You can kind of see the design here. And this is either a Tachado or Cedar Creek polychrome, which is a White Mountain redware that suggests connections more to the sort of western Mogollon area. than some of the other stuff that we have seen. And so this just shows the Lion Mountain area really is at this crossroads of these different regional traditions. And they are getting some material in from all of those traditions, despite what appears to be a dominance of Cibola whiteware. So in summary then, this is all the time periods. And I guess this is the point that I'm trying to make in just here at this table. I hope my co-PIs believe that what we're seeing is this development of a community centered on a ritual core, right? So all of these ritual Pueblo architecture or public architecture that grows, more and more of them through time, but kind of all in the same area. Over 3 centuries. This is 300 years that we're talking about. So there is this early group of people in the area that settle in the early agricultural and pre-agricultural time periods. There are people in this area. Maybe this early settlement are local folks that are transitioning from a foraging culture. Maybe they're people moving in from another area. We don't really know. We just, this is all survey data. But they built a great kiva in the P1, which seems to be the first ritual structure, becomes the center of this ritual area. In the P2, we see a building boom in the immediate area. Again, there's no reason to believe that here these folks they're immigrants. It's just the immediate area seems to have a lot of people in it. There's continuity of pottery types, there's continuity of architectural styles, but it seems that these folks are buying into the Chaco phenomena and that there is a great house that seems to have attracted a community immediately around it. Then the Pueblo III, the post-Chaco period, there's even larger community with more rooms, more room blocks, and more public architecture. What the purpose of these sort of multiple post-Chacoan great house sites are is not clear, but the community has been here now for 300 years, and at some point, the end of this period, they leave. They seem to have abandoned the structures, but we don't really know for sure where they go. Did they leave the whole region, or did they just reorganize into Pueblo IV sites that are still within the region? And that's a question we still have. Harkening back to Steve's quote, what does this mean about the people in the area? What do I think is going on, right? I've described these sites. We're talking about 300 years, 300 plus years. So in my calculation of thinking about centuries, I think about that being about 3 generations a century. So we're talking 9 to 12 generations of people living in this area. I mean, think about that, 9 to 12 generations, right? We don't usually think in those terms. But over that amount of time, these multiple generations of people that are all the same group of people, same community of people, they see the introduction of agriculture. They see the rise and the fall of Chaco. They were potentially affected by the Great Drought, if not environmentally, then potentially socially. They see immigration of a large group of people from the Mesa Verde area. And there's probably other events that happened that were really important to them and that had social consequences that we aren't seeing right now. We may never see, but that's a lot of people living in this area, or that's a lot of generations living in this area for a long period of time that experienced a lot of things, right? And then as a part of that, they're building up their landscape. So I think this is a quote from our paper, mine and my colleagues, but ultimately, I think the 2 points I want to make about people at least 2 points. I may come up with more as I'm talking, because I do that. But the collapse of the Chaco phenomena, the collapse of the Chaco Canyon and its network had to have important social consequences and ritual consequences for the residents of Lion Mountain, because they seem to be buying into that system. So they seem to have sort of refocused what they were doing by choosing to build new ceremonial sites that look like Chaco, at least somewhat, right? Maybe slightly different versions of the same thing, right? It's a play upon a theme. I think that the post-Chacoan Great House sites clearly emulate Bobcat Pueblo and the Chaco phenomena in general to some extent. And I hope my co-PIs assume that they serve this sort of similar integrative purpose in terms of having ritual features and have community members come and participate in ritual and other kinds of public social activities. But I also think that there are these later generations living among the ruins of Chaco and the ruins of the Great Kiva. And maybe they didn't think of them as ruins in the same way we do as archaeologists, but they are living on this landscape that they have been building and creating new structures and leaving behind old structures, or at least using them differently. And this is the Lion Mountain community. Right? These are the people that are part of this community. They're building up their landscape over these generations, and they're modifying the landscape. It's growing, it's changing. And those later generations, as they're walking over that landscape, just like we as archaeologists walk over that landscape, they would have recognized these old features. There's probably stories about these features. There's probably elders who are like, oh yeah, I remember when Bob lived there, or whoever lived there, or oh, I remember when my grandpa told me about this place. And so in living in this landscape, they're being reminded of their heritage, right? The landscape becomes a really important part of their identity and a memory of who they are and a reminder of who they are as time goes on. And that, I love that, right? I love that they are living on the landscape in a way similar but different to we as archaeologists visit these places of the past and think about how people lived there and how they were important to those people. So that's my story about Lion Mountain. What's next for all of us? We're still interested in social and cultural developments. Pueblo IV period, as I talked about a little bit, and I will be talking about the Pueblo IV period at an Ameren talk. And then also dynamics between the immigration site. Currently, we are collaborating with Zuni. We should have done more of that earlier, but we are trying to work with them to prioritize our goals and their goals and decide what works for both of us. Excavate, continue survey, XRF LiDAR. There are museum collections from the immigration site at Maxwell. We hope to visit some of the sites on private land, and then also do a deeper comparison with some of the other regions that I mentioned. That's it. Thank you for having me. Thank you for listening. I know that there's a lot going on here, and so hopefully people were able to follow along. Bobcat Pueblo does not include a scale. It should include a scale. Yes, this right here is 20 meters. If you can see that, there is a scale up on top. So hopefully that gives you what you need, Al. The Great Kiva, based upon this, is probably 10 to 15 meters. Oh, Al. There's a lot of Al questions. On the Pueblo III aerial photo, the 4 public architectural features, red dots on the southern ridge, are aligned approximately to the orientation of the summer solstice sunrise. Do you have any? Yes. Do you have any plans to check out how close these sites' alignment is to solstice? We have talked about this regularly. Johnny Schaefer and I have joked about also doing this at the winter solstice, come out at Christmas and sleep out there even though it snows and it's cold. We've talked about doing it at the summer solstice, The problem is we don't usually go out there until July after the fire ban. But yes, we are aware that a lot of these sites seem to have important alignments, and we hope to answer those questions. You spoke of the Lion Mountain area being somewhat of a cultural crossroads area. Have you found any Salado polychrome? No. In the Pueblo IV sites. No, we have not. We have found Zuni pottery. We have found Rio Grande pottery. We have found Casas Grandes pottery. But we have not found Salado. So yeah, we think it's outside that area, or outside the Roosevelt redware distribution. Carl, is there a relationship between Lion Mountain community and the Pueblo communities near Magdalena? So Magdalena is the town that, the modern day town that we are, I don't know how many miles from, 22 miles, maybe 20 miles. The Pueblo communities near Magdalena, we don't know that yet. It's my sense, and I'm saying this for myself and not my co-PIs, it's my sense that the sites in the Lion Mountain area really are kind of tied to the west and the Cibola area, and the stuff down near Magdalena has more of a Rio Grande feel to it, but we don't know for sure. Jenny, do the Zuni claim them as their ancestors? The Zuni are very interested in this area. They recognize that there is, that at least some of the folks in this area may be ancestral. Yeah, and I'm going to leave it at that. There's a lot of conversations we have with the Zuni that I'm not sure how much I can share, or I wouldn't want to misquote. But yeah, part of the reason they're out there is because they're interested in this area as being traditional ancestral lands. Do you think each change was the result of a new infusion of immigrants? I don't think so. I think we're looking at a local development starting in the Pueblo I, and we have local people continuing to live in this area and expand it, or maybe becoming more and more condensed into this area. In part, I think that because the pottery tradition really does seem to be similar. In part because there seems to be this continuity in architecture. However, it also sort of depends on what you mean by immigrants. Like, how far away do they have to be to actually be immigrants? Do they have to speak a different language, right? If people from the Los Gigantes area picked up from Zuni and moved over to this area because they're doing things similarly, would that be immigrants, or would that be just two people on both sides of the Cibola area? And so it gets a little bit tricky, but my personal sense is that this really is kind of a local development over those 300 years. Libby, Beck, where were there agricultural fields? All of those blue triangles, or at least many of the blue triangles that are other, most of those are agricultural fields and agricultural areas. Lawrence, are there any rock art sites? No, not in our immediate area. There are no large rock art panels. That may be in part because of the type of rocks that are out here. They don't have a really great patina on them. But no, we have not identified and mapped any rock art sites in the area. Daniel, what methods were used to get the age of the things found? So all of the dates used in this are based upon pottery types that have been cross-dated from other sites that have actual dates. And so it is entirely at this point based upon pottery from the surface, right? So if you have St. John's, that St. John's polychrome is made approximately AD 1200 to 1275. Tularosa black on white has the same time frame. So we're looking at those pottery types and creating these dates for the sites. Steve Fisher, are these sites ancestral to Acoma? The area is ancestral to Acoma. They consider it as part of their traditional hunting grounds. In terms of these specific sites, I do not have an answer to that question at this time. Do you have plans to extend the survey area? Do you have new questions you'd like to ask? Yes, hopefully we will, continue surveying until we can't walk anymore. I would love to continue to survey. Right now, one of the things I'm interested in is understanding the area, Gallinas Pueblo, the immigrant site, 6 miles east of the Lion Mountain community. The area in between has not been systematically surveyed to the extent that I would like it to have. Are there other Lion Mountain sites? Are there any other immigrant sites? Is there a no man's zone? What's going on between those two areas? And that 6 miles is where I would like to explore next. I think my co-PIs have other ideas, but that's one of the things that I'm really interested in. Let's see, chat.
Susan, yeah, there's a couple of questions in the chat
Yep.
section, so if you can answer those. And we have about 5 minutes left, so pick one or two and then let's call it a night, okay?
So what's with the hold sherds? The disc sherd? There's a couple of those that we found, not a lot of them. There are people who have said that those sherds are for our weaving. There's other reasons you might have holes in a sherd. They could have been used for weights. They could have been used for pendants. Although being right in the middle, we don't know for sure. And given that it was on the surface, I don't know that we have a really good context to figure out what the different kinds of work sherds were used for that are on the surface. But there are other types of work sherds, including ones with holes in them at other sites that are in the area that we have actually found in excavation that have better context. And a lot of those seem to be used for pendants and jewelry, but they also could have been used as gaming pieces. So don't know for these specific ones because the context is bad. Thank you, Maxine. I'm glad you came. Decoration from an ancestor's pot. That's not a question, so I don't know what more there is. So I think that covers everything. Yeah, I think that covers all the questions. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for your questions. That was fast and quick, but I think I got through everything. And yeah, if you have questions or if you're interested in the actual publications, feel free to email me. I can be found at ASM, pretty easy to find. And I'm happy to share more information or answer more questions as they come up. So thank you very much. And thank you, Sebastian, for being such a great host.
Yeah, thank you, Sus. One more thing, this is gonna be on our YouTube channel, probably by Wednesday, so if anybody wants to see it again. Also, just join us again next month for another exciting lecture. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sus. That was great.
Thank you.
See you guys next month.